The cruel glint in Andrew Miller's eyes told Martha Gates everything she needed to know as he yanked her roughly by the arm toward the waiting stranger with a prized stallion. "A fine trade, wouldn't you say, mister? My wife for your horse, she's more useful than she looks." The words sliced through Martha's heart like a knife as dust swirled around them in the scorching Arizona summer of 1875. Martha couldn't believe this was happening. Just 3 years ago, she'd been a hopeful young bride of 18, her heart full of dreams when she'd married Andrew. Now, at 21, those dreams had long since withered under his cruel treatment, but nothing had prepared her for this final humiliation on the outskirts of Prescott. "You can't be serious," the stranger said, his voice low and steady despite the outrageous proposition. Martha looked up through tear-blurred eyes at the tall figure standing beside the magnificent black stallion. The man was lean but strong-looking, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. His hat was pushed back slightly, revealing tousled dark hair that curled at his collar. "Never been more serious," Andrew sneered, giving Martha another rough shove that nearly sent her sprawling in the dirt. "She's yours if the horse is mine. I've had my eye on that stallion since you rode into town." The stranger's jaw tightened as he looked from Andrew to Martha's frightened face. "My name is Elijah Nash," he said directly to Martha, ignoring Andrew entirely. "And I don't trade in human lives, madam," Andrew spat on the ground. "Then you're a fool. This stallion's worth more than gold in these parts, and I'm offering a fair trade." "She cooks well enough and doesn't talk back much." He yanked Martha's arm again, making her wince. "But she's barren, 3 years and not a single brat to show for it." Martha felt her cheeks burn with shame. The humiliation was almost worse than the fear as Elijah Nash's gaze swept over her, taking in her worn dress and the bruise yellowing on her cheekbone. "I'll take her," Nash said suddenly, his voice calm but cold. Martha's head snapped up in disbelief. Andrew laughed triumphantly. But Nash continued, "I'll not be party to treating a woman like property. I'll buy her freedom proper." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. $200. You sign divorce papers and you never come near her again." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "That stallion's worth $500 easy. The stallion isn't for sale." Nash's hand moved subtly toward his holster. "The 200 is for the divorce, nothing more." Martha held her breath. She knew Andrew's temper, knew how quickly he could turn violent. To her surprise, Andrew seemed to be calculating something behind his eyes. 300, he countered, "and she's all yours, papers signed." 250, Nash replied evenly. "Final offer." Andrew stared at the leather pouch, then at the gun on Nash's hip. "Fine," he said finally. 250 it is." Martha could hardly believe what was happening. Was she being sold? Rescued? She couldn't tell which, and her legs trembled beneath her as Elijah Nash counted out the money. "We'll go to the judge now," Nash said firmly. "Get those papers signed proper." An hour later, Martha sat numbly in Judge Wilson's office as Andrew's signature dried on the document that ended their marriage. He'd taken the money without a backward glance, heading straight for the saloon with a spring in his step that told her he considered himself the winner of this bizarre transaction. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Wilson began. "It's Miss Gates now," Elijah Nash corrected quietly. "Of course." "Miss Gates, do you understand what has transpired here today?" Martha nodded slowly. "My former husband, has divorced me, and you consent to this divorce." Martha almost laughed. Consent? When had anyone ever asked for her consent about anything? "Yes," she whispered. "I consent." "Very well." The judge stamped the papers and handed her a copy. "You're a free woman now, free." The word echoed strangely in her mind as she followed Elijah Nash out into the harsh sunlight. They stood awkwardly on the boardwalk, the noise of the busy street surrounding them. "What happens now?" Martha asked, clutching the divorce papers like a shield. Nash looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Madam, I didn't buy you. I want to be clear on that. I paid for your freedom, not for you." "Then why?" Her voice cracked, his eyes softened. "No decent man could stand by and watch that." "You're free to go wherever you please. But if you have nowhere to go, I have a small ranch about 20 miles outside of town. I could use help around the place and you'd have your own cabin. Proper wages, of course." Martha stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden intentions. Why would you help a stranger? Nash was quiet for a moment before answering. Because 6 years ago, my sister was in a similar situation. No one helped her. Something dark passed across his face. She didn't survive it. Martha felt a chill despite the heat. I'm sorry, don't be sorry. Just decide what you want to do now that you're free to choose. Freedom. Such a foreign concept. Martha looked down the dusty main street of Prescott. She had no family to return to, no money of her own, and few skills beyond keeping house. Pride told her to refuse charity, but survival instinct spoke louder. I'll take the job, she said finally. For now, Nash nodded, seeming relieved. We'll get you some supplies before heading out. He gestured toward the general store. Whatever you need. Later that afternoon, with a small trunk of necessities loaded in Nash's wagon, Martha climbed up beside him, the stallion tied behind them. As they left Prescott behind, she couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Andrew charging after them, demanding his money back, demanding her back. He won't follow, Nash said, as if reading her thoughts. Men like him don't care enough to chase what they've already sold. You don't know him, Martha whispered. I know his kind. Nash kept his eyes on the trail ahead. We'll be at my place before nightfall. It's not much, but it's peaceful. Martha nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Mr. Nash, Elijah, he corrected gently. Elijah, she tried the name cautiously. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said with a faint smile. Wait until you see what a poor housekeeper I am. For the first time in what felt like years, Martha felt a small spark of something like hope. The journey to Elijah Nash's ranch was made mostly in silence. Martha was still reeling from the day's events, and Elijah seemed content to leave her to her thoughts. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail, winding through scrubby terrain dotted with prickly pear and kala cactus. The August heat was relentless, but occasionally a breeze would offer momentary relief. That's my place, Elijah said finally, nodding toward a modest homestead nestled in a small valley. It wasn't grand by any measure, but Martha could see it had been built with care, a main house constructed of sturdy logs, a barn, corral, and what appeared to be a smaller cabin some distance from the main house. It's lovely, she said honestly. It's a work in progress, he replied. Been at it 4 years now, since I came back from the war. As they drew closer, Martha could see a veranda running along the front of the main house, with a rocking chair and several potted plants that looked in desperate need of water. The smaller cabin sat about 50 yards away, near a grove of cottonwoods. That'll be your place, he said, nodding toward the smaller structure. Used to be my foreman's cabin until he left to get married last spring. Haven't replaced him yet, he paused. It's simple but sound. No leaks, even in the worst storms. Martha felt a wave of relief. She'd half expected to be housed in the barn or some lean-to, despite his earlier assurances. Thank you, she said. It looks perfect. They pulled up in front of the main house, and Elijah set the brake before jumping down. He came around to help her, offering his hand. Martha hesitated only briefly before accepting it, noticing the calluses that spoke of hard work. Let me show you around before we unload your things, he said. The tour was brief but comprehensive. The main house was simply furnished but clean, with a comfortable-looking parlor, a kitchen with a large wood stove, and what she glimpsed as 2 bedrooms off a short hallway. The barn housed 4 horses besides his stallion and a milk cow. The chicken coop behind the house contained a dozen hens and a rooster that eyed them suspiciously. The vegetable garden's not doing well, Elijah admitted as they passed a sad-looking plot. I'm better with horses than carrots. I could help with that, Martha offered hesitantly. I've always had a way with growing things. I'd be grateful, he said with a small smile that transformed his serious face. Now, let's get you settled in your cabin. The cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside, one main room with a small stove, table, 2 chairs, and a surprisingly comfortable-looking bed, plus a lean-to addition that served as a washroom. Simple curtains hung at the 2 windows, faded but clean. It's not fancy, Elijah said, setting her trunk down near the bed. It's more than I expected, Martha replied truthfully. After years of living under Andrew's thumb, having a space that was entirely hers felt like unimaginable luxury. Well, I'll leave you to get settled, he said, moving toward the door. "There's stew on the stove at the main house when you're hungry. No need to cook tonight." After he left, Martha sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. Morning had found her a mistreated wife, and evening found her a divorced woman living on a stranger's ranch. She buried her face in her hands and allowed herself, finally, to cry not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of escape. Later, after washing her face and changing into one of her new dresses, a simple blue calico purchased that afternoon in Prescott, Martha made her way to the main house. She hesitated at the door, uncertain of the protocol in this strange new arrangement. "It's open," Elijah called from inside. "Come in." She found him setting the table, movements efficient but slightly awkward as though unused to such domestic tasks. "I can do that," she offered. "You're not on duty yet," he said with another of those transformative smiles. "Tonight you're a guest." They ate the stew, which was surprisingly good, with fresh bread that Elijah admitted he'd bought in town the day before. "So," he said as they finished their meal, "perhaps we should discuss what your duties will entail." Martha tensed slightly. Noticing her discomfort, he added quickly, "I'm offering fair employment, Miss Gates. Nothing more, nothing less." "Of course," she said, embarrassed by her assumption. "What would you expect of me? Cooking, cleaning, mending the usual household tasks." "Help with the garden would be appreciated, as you offered. I can pay $15 a month plus room and board." Martha was startled by the amount. It was more than generous for a housekeeper's position. "That's too much," she protested. "It's the going rate," he said firmly. "I won't shortchange you because you were in a desperate situation." They discussed the specifics of her duties, and Martha found herself impressed by Elijah's fairness. He expected reasonable work, but offered reasonable compensation and conditions in return. "One more thing," he said as they finished. "Your past is your own business, but if your former husband should ever cause trouble, I need to know." Martha stared down at her plate. "I don't think he will. He got what he wanted, money and freedom from a barren wife." "Nevertheless," Elijah said quietly, "this is your home now for as long as you choose to stay. You're safe here." Home. The word settled in Martha's chest like a warm stone. After 3 years of hell with Andrew, she barely remembered what home felt like. "Thank you," she said simply. That night, in her own cabin, Martha lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Arizona night. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the cottonwood leaves rustled in the gentle breeze. It wasn't silence that kept her awake, but the absence of fear, the strange, weightless feeling of not waiting for a drunken fist or cruel word. Sleep, when it finally came, was deeper than any she'd known in years. The following weeks established a routine that brought Martha an unexpected sense of peace. She rose early each morning, prepared breakfast for herself and Elijah, then spent the days bringing order to a household that had clearly lacked a woman's touch for some time. The vegetable garden was her special project. She coaxed the struggling plants back to health and planted new seeds in the sections that had been abandoned to weeds. Elijah provided anything she requested without question: seeds, tools, even a rain barrel to collect the precious water from the occasional summer storm. Their interactions were polite, but gradually warming. Elijah spent most days working with his horses. He bred and trained them. She learned, selling to ranchers and the occasional cavalry buyer, but they shared meals and sometimes conversation in the evenings. Martha learned that Elijah had fought for the Union in the war, had come west afterward seeking a new beginning. He spoke little of his family beyond the brief mention of his sister, and Martha didn't press. She, in turn, shared little of her own past, though sometimes in the quiet evenings she would reveal small pieces her childhood in Missouri. Her parents' deaths from fever when she was 16, the hasty marriage to Andrew that had seemed her only option at the time. "You were very young," Elijah observed one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Too young to recognize a bad bargain," Martha agreed, her hands busy with mending one of his shirts. "Andrew was charming at first. By the time I saw his true nature, we were already far from anyone I knew." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "Some men aren't fit to be husbands. And some women aren't fit to be wives, she replied softly. At least, that's what Andrew always said when I failed to conceive. That wasn't your failing, Elijah said with unexpected fierceness. Some couples simply aren't blessed with children. The fault could as easily have been his. Martha looked up, surprised by his vehemence. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of the conversation. The garden's coming along nicely, she said, changing the subject. We should have fresh vegetables soon. Elijah accepted the shift in topic gracefully. You've worked wonders with it. I'm grateful. As August gave way to September, Martha settled more confidently into her role. The house was transformed clean, organized, and increasingly comfortable with the small touches she added. Curtains she'd sewn from fabric purchased on their weekly trips into Prescott. Wildflowers arranged in jars. The scent of fresh baked bread that now regularly filled the kitchen. Elijah never failed to notice and appreciate her efforts, always thanking her with a sincerity that made her work feel valued in a way Andrew had never managed. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, not inappropriate or threatening, but thoughtful, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle. It was during one of their trips to town in late September that the fragile piece of her new life was shattered. They had finished their shopping and were loading supplies into the wagon when Martha froze, her blood turning to ice as a familiar voice called out from across the street. Well, if it isn't my ex-wife and her buyer. Andrew Miller swaggered toward them, clearly drunk despite the early hour. Martha instinctively stepped closer to Elijah, who moved slightly in front of her, his posture relaxed but alert. Mr. Miller, Elijah acknowledged coolly. I trust you're keeping well. Andrew sneered, stopping a few feet away. Well enough, thanks to your generosity. Though I've been thinking I might have undervalued my goods. His gaze slid to Martha, making her skin crawl. How's she working out for you? Getting your money's worth? Martha felt the heat of humiliation rise in her cheeks. Several passers-by had stopped to watch the confrontation, and she could imagine the rumors that would soon spread. Miss Gates is an exemplary housekeeper, Elijah replied evenly. But that's hardly your concern anymore. Andrew laughed, an ugly sound. Miss Gates, is it? Very proper. Tell me, Nash, are you betting her yet, or are you still pretending you bought her for her cooking? Martha gasped, and Elijah's hand moved to her elbow, a steadying touch. You're drunk, Miller, Elijah said, his voice dangerously quiet. I suggest you move along before you say something you'll regret. Or what? Andrew took another step closer. You'll shoot me in broad daylight, over used goods. Martha felt Elijah tense beside her, saw his free hand drift toward his holster. Mr. Nash, she said quickly, laying her hand on his arm. Please, he's not worth it. For a moment she thought Elijah might ignore her plea, then he gave a nearly imperceptible nod and turned back to the wagon. Come, Miss Gates, we've wasted enough time here. Andrew wasn't finished. As they moved to climb into the wagon, he lunged forward, grabbing Martha's arm. Maybe I want her back, he slurred. Maybe I'll pay you $300 and take what's mine. What happened next was so swift Martha barely registered it. One moment Andrew was gripping her arm painfully, the next he was sprawled in the dust, blood streaming from his nose where Elijah's fist had connected. She's not property, Elijah said, standing over him. She's not yours, she's not mine, she's her own woman. Touch her again, and a bloody nose will be the least of your concerns. Andrew scrambled backward, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Nash. Yes, it is, Elijah replied calmly, helping Martha into the wagon. It was over the moment you traded your wife for money. Remember that? They drove out of town in silence, Martha trembling with reaction. It wasn't until they were well beyond Prescott's outskirts that Elijah spoke. I apologize for losing my temper back there. Martha looked at him in surprise. You're apologizing to me, after what he said. Violence isn't usually my first choice, Elijah said, flexing his hand where the knuckles were reddening. But some men only understand one language. Thank you, Martha said softly, for defending me. No one's ever done that before. Elijah glanced at her, his expression troubled. You deserve better than what life has dealt you so far, Miss Gates. Martha, she said impulsively. Please, after everything, I think you could call me Martha. A small smile touched his lips. Martha, then, and I'm Elijah, remember. They rode in companionable silence for a while, until Martha voiced the fear that had been growing since the confrontation. Do you think he meant it? About it not being over? Elijah's expression darkened. Men like Miller talk big, especially when their pride is wounded. But he's a coward at heart. Still, we'll be careful for a while. I don't want you going into town alone for some time. The thought of Andrew seeking revenge shadowed the remainder of their journey home, but as the ranch came into view, Martha felt some of her tension ease. This place had become a sanctuary in the short time she'd been there, and Elijah's steady presence offered a security she hadn't known in years. That evening, as they unloaded the supplies, Martha noticed Elijah wincing as he lifted a heavy sack of flour. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him with concern. "It's nothing. Old injury acts up sometimes," he dismissed, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "Let me help," she insisted, taking the flour from him. "And later I'll make a poultice for whatever's troubling you. I'm good with remedies." Elijah looked like he might protest, then relented with a small nod. "Thank you, Martha." After dinner, she prepared a hot poultice of herbs she'd been drying from the garden. Elijah sat uncomfortably at the kitchen table as she approached with the steaming cloth. "Where does it hurt?" she asked. He hesitated before unbuttoning his shirt partway, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his left shoulder down his chest. "Shrapnel," he explained briefly. "Near Gettysburg. It heals, but sometimes the muscles seize up." Martha tried to keep her expression neutral as she gently applied the hot cloth to his shoulder and upper chest. The scar was just one of several she could see marking his skin, the evidence of a hard life and harder war. His muscles were tense beneath her touch, whether from pain or the unusual intimacy of the moment, she couldn't tell. "You have a healer's hands," he said quietly as the heat from the poultice began to ease his discomfort. "My mother taught me," Martha replied, carefully avoiding his eyes as she adjusted the cloth. "She always said a woman should know how to heal as well as how to hurt, though she hoped we'd use the first skill more than the second." "Wise woman," Elijah murmured. "Sounds like you take after her." Martha felt a blush rising in her cheeks at the compliment. "I try to remember her lessons." Their eyes met briefly, and Martha was suddenly acutely aware of their proximity, of her hands on his bare skin, of the quiet of the house around them. Something shifted in Elijah's gaze, a warmth that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been carefully hidden. The moment was broken by a sound from outside, the distant whinny of a horse in the corral. Elijah cleared his throat and straightened, readjusting his shirt. "Thank you," he said formally. "It feels much better." Martha stepped back, gathering the remains of her herbal preparations. "I'll make you some more to use tomorrow. The effects work best with repeated application." "You're very kind," he said, rising from the chair. "But don't trouble yourself too much on my account." "It's no trouble," she assured him. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." As she walked back to her cabin later that evening, Martha found her thoughts returning to the moment in the kitchen, to the connection she'd felt forming between them, tenuous but undeniable. It both thrilled and frightened her. After Andrew, she had promised herself never to be vulnerable to a man again. Yet Elijah Nash was unlike any man she'd known. His quiet strength, his respect for her autonomy, his flashes of gentle humor all combined to create a person she found herself increasingly drawn to, despite her caution. Lying in bed that night, Martha wondered if she was imagining things, projecting her own growing feelings onto simple kindness from a decent man. She resolved to be careful, to guard her heart. Falling in love with her employer would be a complication neither of them needed, especially with the shadow of Andrew's threats hanging over them. But as sleep claimed her, Martha's last thought was of Elijah's eyes and the warmth she'd glimpsed there in that unguarded moment. October brought cooler temperatures and changing colors to the Arizona landscape. The routine of ranch life continued, with Martha and Elijah falling into comfortable patterns of coexistence. If there was a new awareness between them after the night of the poultice, neither mentioned it directly, though Martha noticed small changes in their interactions, Elijah's hand lingering when he passed her something at dinner. Her own heightened awareness of his presence whenever they occupied the same space. Their trip to town, the previous month, had added a new element of caution to their lives. Elijah rode into Prescott alone for necessities, always returning with news that Andrew Miller had been seen gambling or drinking, but hadn't made any moves toward the ranch. Still, Elijah had taken to keeping a rifle near at hand, and Martha found herself jumping at unexpected noises, especially after dark. One crisp afternoon in mid-October, Martha was gathering the last tomatoes from her flourishing garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw Elijah returning earlier than expected from a trip to a neighboring ranch where he'd gone to look at a mare for potential breeding. As he drew closer, she could tell something was wrong. His expression was grim, and he was leading a second horse, a weary-looking bay with a crude brand on its flank. "Elijah," she called, setting down her basket and hurrying to meet him. "What's happened?" He dismounted, his movements stiff with what she now recognized as controlled anger. "Miller's been busy," he said, gesturing to the bay. "Stole this horse from the Wilkins place 2 nights ago. Tom Wilkins tracked him as far as the creek that borders our property." Martha felt cold despite the afternoon warmth. "You think he's nearby?" "I think he's sending a message," Elijah replied, his voice tight. "The horse was wandering loose by our south fence line, saddle still on, reins cut. Wilkins's son was knocked unconscious during the theft. Could have been killed." Martha wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly afraid. "What do we do?" Elijah's expression softened as he looked at her. "First, we return this horse to Wilkins, then we prepare." He hesitated. "Martha, maybe you should stay in town for a while with Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house." "No," she said immediately, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be driven from my home, not again." Something flickered in Elijah's eyes at her use of the word home, but he only nodded. "All right, but you'll need to be extra cautious. Don't go far from the house alone, especially near dusk." He looked toward the distant tree line that marked their property's edge. "I don't think he'd risk coming here in daylight, but night's another matter." That evening, after returning the stolen horse to a grateful Tom Wilkins, Elijah taught Martha how to use a shotgun, a weapon he deemed easier for her to handle than a pistol. "I pray you never need it," he said, as she practiced aiming at a target he'd set up behind the barn. "But if trouble comes, don't hesitate. Better to shoot and miss than to wait too long." Martha nodded, feeling the weight of the weapon in her hands, hoping her trembling wasn't visible. "I've never hurt anyone," she said quietly. Elijah's hand covered hers on the shotgun barrel, warm and steadying. "And with luck, you never will, but I need to know you can protect yourself if I'm not here." The thought of Elijah not being there to protect her caused a surge of panic that surprised Martha with its intensity. In just 2 months, she had come to rely on his presence, his strength, his quiet steadfastness. "I can do what's necessary," she assured him, meeting his gaze directly. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "That's all any of us can do." They established new security measures around the ranch, checking the property boundaries daily, locking doors that had previously been left open, keeping the dogs closer to the house at night. Elijah took to sleeping in the main house's front room rather than his bedroom, positioned to hear any approach. October gave way to November, bringing the first real chill of approaching winter. No sign of Andrew appeared, but the tension remained, an unwelcome undercurrent to their days. One evening, as the first snowflakes of the season drifted lazily past the windows, Martha and Elijah sat before the fire in the main house parlor. She was mending a shirt while he cleaned his rifle, the comfortable silence broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional howl of wind outside. "Winter's coming early this year," Elijah observed, glancing toward the window where snow was beginning to accumulate. "Good thing we got the last of the garden harvest in yesterday." "Yes," Martha agreed, tying off a neat stitch. "The preserve should see us through until spring." She realized as she spoke that she was thinking of the future, of remaining here through winter and beyond, though they had never discussed extending her employment past the immediate term. Elijah seemed to catch the implication as well. He set aside his rifle and turned to face her. "Martha, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened inexplicably. "Yes," Your arrangement here, it was meant to be temporary until you found your feet. It's been over 2 months now. Martha's fingers stilled on her sewing. Are you saying you no longer need my services? The thought sent a spike of panic through her. No, Elijah said quickly, just the opposite. I'm saying that if you wish to leave, seek opportunities elsewhere, I would understand, but he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. I hope you'll stay. Relief flooded through her. I'd like to stay, she said simply. Elijah's smile transformed his face, softening the lines that worry had etched there in recent weeks. I'm glad to hear it. Martha returned to her sewing, but her mind was racing. There had been something in his voice, something beyond an employer's satisfaction with a good housekeeper. Or was she imagining it, projecting her own growing feelings? Elijah, she began, not sure what she meant to say, but feeling a need to clarify what was happening between them. She never got to finish her thought. A thunderous crash against the front door made them both jump to their feet. Elijah had his rifle in hand instantly, motioning for Martha to move behind him. Nash, Andrew Miller's voice, slurred with drink but unmistakable, bellowed from outside. Come out and face me, you thieving bastard. Martha's blood ran cold. Elijah, don't stay here, he commanded, moving toward the door. Get the shotgun from the kitchen and be ready. Martha hurried to comply, her hands shaking as she retrieved the weapon. Through the window, she could see Andrew swaying in the yard, a pistol in one hand, a bottle in the other. Snow swirled around him, dusting his hatless head and shoulders. The front door opened, and Elijah stepped onto the veranda, rifle held ready but not aimed. You're trespassing, Miller, he called, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp night air. Andrew laughed, an ugly sound. Protecting your investment, Nash. How is my wife working out for you? Ex-wife, Elijah corrected calmly. And she's not an investment, she's a free woman. Free. Andrew spat on the ground. She wasn't free, she was mine, and you stole her. You sold her, Elijah countered. Or tried to. Fortunately for Martha, I wasn't buying a woman, just her freedom from you. Martha watched through the window, heart pounding, as Andrew's face contorted with rage. You think you're better than me. I know what you're doing with her. The whole town knows. The town knows nothing, Elijah replied, still maddeningly calm. Now put down the gun and leave my property before this ends badly for you. For a moment, it seemed Andrew might comply. He wavered, the pistol drooping in his hand. Then his expression hardened. No, I came for what's mine. Everything happened at once. Andrew raised his pistol, Elijah dove to the side as a shot rang out, and Martha screamed, certain she was about to watch Elijah die on her account. But Elijah had moved faster than Andrew's drunken aim could follow. Rolling from the veranda into the snow, he came up with his rifle trained on Andrew's chest. Drop it, he commanded. Last warning. Andrew's face was a mask of hatred. For one terrible moment, Martha thought he would force Elijah to kill him. Then, with a curse, he threw his pistol into the snow. This isn't over, he snarled. It is over, Elijah said, rising to his feet but keeping his rifle aimed steadily. You'll leave this property now and you won't come back. Next time I won't be so patient. She isn't worth dying for, Andrew sneered. Elijah's voice was quiet but carried clearly in the still night air. That's where you're wrong, Miller. Some things are worth any price. Martha's breath caught in her throat at his words, at the conviction behind them. Andrew stared at Elijah for a long moment, then spat again before turning and staggering toward a horse Martha hadn't noticed before, tethered to a tree at the edge of the yard. He mounted awkwardly and wheeled the animal around. You'll regret this, he called over his shoulder as he rode away, quickly disappearing into the swirling snow. Elijah remained on alert until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he lower his rifle and turn back toward the house. Martha met him at the door, the shotgun trembling in her hands. Are you all right? They asked in unison, then both gave shaky laughs at the coincidence. I'm fine, Elijah assured her, taking the shotgun gently from her grip. He missed by a mile. I was so afraid, Martha admitted, her composure finally cracking, when I saw him raise that gun. Essachichach, Elijah soothed, setting aside both weapons before tentatively opening his arms. Martha stepped into his embrace without hesitation, the fear of the past minutes dissolving into relief at his solid presence. He's gone now, Elijah murmured against her hair, and I don't think he'll be back anytime soon. Martha wasn't so sure. She'd seen the hatred in Andrew's eyes, the wounded pride. Men like Andrew Miller didn't surrender easily, especially when they believed they'd been wronged. But for now, in the circle of Elijah's arms, with snow falling outside and the fire crackling within, she allowed herself to feel safe. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight she was home, and she was not alone. Elijah held her longer than was perhaps proper, his cheek resting against her hair, his heartbeat steadying under her ear. When they finally separated, Martha was certain something fundamental had shifted between them. "You should try to rest," Elijah said, his voice gentle. "I'll keep watch tonight." Martha shook her head. "I couldn't possibly sleep now." She gestured toward the parlor. "Let's sit by the fire a while." "I'll make some tea." In the kitchen, as Martha prepared the tea with hands that still trembled slightly, she replayed Elijah's words to Andrew. "Some things are worth any price." Had he meant her specifically, or was he speaking in general terms about protecting those under his care? The uncertainty made her chest ache with a hope she was afraid to acknowledge. When she returned to the parlor with 2 steaming cups, Elijah had built up the fire and was standing before it, staring into the flames with a distant expression. "A penny for your thoughts," she said, offering him a cup. He accepted with a small smile. "They're probably not worth that much." "I disagree." Martha settled into her chair, cradling her own tea. "You were very brave tonight." Elijah shook his head. "Not brave, just doing what needed doing." He hesitated. "Martha, I'm sorry you had to face him again. If I'd been more careful, this isn't your fault," she interrupted firmly. "Andrew makes his own choices, bad ones usually." That drew a brief chuckle from him. "Still, I promised you'd be safe here." "And I am," she assured him. "Thanks to you." They lapsed into silence, sipping their tea, the crackling fire and occasional gusts of wind against the windows the only sounds. Martha could feel Elijah gathering himself to say something more, his posture slightly tense despite his outward calm. Finally, he set down his cup and turned to face her directly. "Martha, there's something I need to say, and after tonight, I don't want to wait any longer to say it." Her heart began to race again, but not from fear this time. "What is it?" "When I paid for your divorce, I truly had no intentions beyond helping someone in trouble," he began, his blue eyes earnest. "I meant what I said about offering you a job, a safe place to stay while you figured out your next steps." Martha nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "But these past months, watching you bring life back to this place, seeing your strength and kindness despite everything you've endured." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that my feelings have changed. Grown into something I wasn't looking for but am grateful to have found." Hope bloomed in Martha's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Elijah, you don't need to say anything," he added quickly. "I know it's too soon, that you're still healing from what that man did to you. I don't expect anything, I just wanted you to know that if someday you might consider." He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. Martha set aside her own cup and stood, moving to stand before him. Gathering her courage, she reached for his hand. "Consider what, exactly?" she asked softly. His fingers closed gently around hers. "A future, here, with me." The simple words held such weight, such promise, that Martha felt tears spring to her eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've been considering that very thing for some time now." Elijah's eyes widened slightly. "You have?" She nodded. "I came here expecting nothing more than temporary shelter and honest work I never imagined I might find." Now it was her turn to search for words. "A home," Elijah suggested. "Yes," she agreed. "A home, and perhaps—" She drew a deep breath, something more. The hope that dawned in Elijah's eyes made him look younger, less burdened by the cares she knew he carried. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he raised his free hand to her cheek. "Martha Gates," he said softly, "you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you faced down Andrew Miller in Judge Wilson's office with your head held high, despite everything." Martha felt her breath catch. "You never said." "How could I? You needed safety, not complications. You needed time to heal. And now?" She whispered. "Now I'm hoping you might feel even a fraction of what I feel for you," he replied, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. Martha leaned into his touch. More than a fraction, she admitted. Much more. The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Martha had known only Andrew's rough, possessive kisses, usually tasting of whiskey and taking rather than giving. Elijah's kiss was nothing like that. It was gentle, almost reverent, and when she responded, he drew her closer with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, Martha stayed within the circle of his arms, feeling safer than she had in years. "I can't offer you much," Elijah said quietly. "This ranch is still a work in progress. I'm still a work in progress." Martha smiled up at him. "You've offered me more than anyone ever has: respect, safety, kindness. The rest we can build together if that's what you want." "It's what I want more than anything," he affirmed, pressing his forehead to hers. "But there's still the matter of Miller." Reality intruded on their moment of happiness, cooling Martha's joy. "You think he'll come back?" "Not tonight," Elijah said. "But eventually, yes. Men like him don't let go easily. His pride won't let him." Martha drew back slightly. "Then we'll face him together," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I won't let him destroy this too." Elijah's expression grew serious. "I won't let him hurt you again, whatever it takes." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and concerned Martha. "Promise me you won't seek him out," she urged. "Promise me you won't put yourself in danger on my account." "I promise to be careful," he said, which wasn't quite what she'd asked. "But I can't promise to stand aside if he threatens you." It was the best she could hope for, Martha knew. Elijah Nash was not a man to back down from what he saw as his duty, especially now that his feelings were involved. They stayed by the fire until the logs burned down to embers, talking of small things and large his hopes for the ranch. Her dreams of perhaps teaching someday, their shared vision of a future that seemed suddenly possible despite the shadow of Andrew Miller's threats. When Martha finally retired to her cabin, the snow had stopped, leaving the world outside transformed into a sparkling white wonderland under the light of a 3/4 moon. Elijah insisted on escorting her, rifle in hand, though the property seemed peaceful. At her door, he kissed her again, a brief but tender meeting of lips that held the promise of more to come. "Sleep well," he murmured. "I'll be keeping watch." "Don't stay up all night," she chided gently. "You need rest too." His smile in the moonlight was wry. "I'll try, but I make no promises." Too much at stake now. As Martha prepared for bed, she found herself humming softly, a lightness in her heart despite the events of the evening. Andrew's appearance had been frightening, yes, but it had also catalyzed this new understanding between her and Elijah, an unexpected gift amid the danger. For the first time since she could remember, Martha fell asleep thinking not of survival or escape, but of possibility and hope. The days that followed were both sweet and tense, sweet in the growing closeness between Martha and Elijah, tense in the constant vigilance they maintained against Andrew's potential return. Elijah rode the boundaries of the property each morning and evening, checking for signs of intrusion. He also made a trip into Prescott to inform Sheriff Jenkins of the incident, though both knew the lawman's jurisdiction and interest had limits. Jenkins says Miller's been in the saloon most nights, bragging about how he's going to reclaim what's his, Elijah reported after returning from town. But the sheriff warned him to stay away from us. Whether he listens is another matter. Despite the threat hanging over them, life at the ranch continued. The November snows gave way to a brief warm spell that allowed them to complete some outdoor chores, mending fences, patching a leak in the barn roof, preparing for the true onset of winter. They didn't speak often of the future, focusing instead on the day-to-day tasks of survival and building their relationship one small step at a time. Elijah was unfailingly respectful of Martha's boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, seemingly content with stolen kisses and quiet conversations by the fire each evening. For Martha, the experience of being courted properly, for that was what it was, she realized was entirely new. Andrew had rushed her into marriage with flattery and false promises, taking advantage of her desperate situation after her parents' deaths. With Elijah, everything was different. He had already proven his character through actions, not words, and his patience now only confirmed what she already knew, that this was a man worth building a life with. As November waned, talk in town turned to the upcoming Christmas festivities. Prescott prided itself on celebrating the holiday properly, despite the frontier setting, with a community dance, special church services, and various gatherings. Martha found herself looking forward to the celebrations with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. "We should go to the Christmas dance," she suggested one evening as they sat companionably in the parlor, Elijah reading a newspaper while she worked on a quilt she'd started for the colder months ahead. He glanced up, surprised. "Are you sure? Miller is likely to be there." "I'm tired of letting fear of him dictate our lives," Martha replied with more confidence than she truly felt. "Besides, I haven't danced in years." Elijah's expression softened. "Then we'll dance until your feet hurt," he promised. "Though I should warn you, I'm not particularly graceful." Martha laughed. "I've seen you break wild horses and shoot targets at 100 paces. I think you can manage a simple waltz." "Breaking horses is simpler than not stepping on a lady's toes," he countered with a rueful smile. 2 days later, on a trip into town for supplies, Martha purchased fabric for a new dress, a deep green wool that would be both practical for the winter weather and festive for the holiday season. She worked on it in the evenings, enjoying Elijah's curious glances as the garment took shape. "It's bad luck to see it before it's finished," she teased when he inquired about her progress. "That's wedding dresses," he corrected, then flushed slightly at the implication. Martha pretended not to notice his discomfort, though her own cheeks warmed at the thought. They hadn't spoken explicitly of marriage yet, but the possibility hovered between them, unacknowledged but increasingly present. As December arrived, bringing with it steadier snowfalls and bitter winds, the ranch settled into its winter rhythm. Elijah spent more time in the barn with the horses and less patrolling the property boundaries, which were now marked by deep drifts that would make approach difficult for any intruder. The Christmas dance was scheduled for December 23rd, with the community gathering at the town hall in Prescott. As the date approached, Martha found herself growing both excited and nervous. It would be her first public appearance with Elijah as something more than his housekeeper, and she knew the gossips of Prescott would have much to say about it. The evening of the dance arrived clear and cold, with stars scattered like diamond chips across the black velvet sky. Martha took special care with her appearance, wearing her new green dress, which she'd trimmed with some lace saved from her mother's things, and arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical knot. When she emerged from her cabin, Elijah was waiting by the wagon, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, though he looked somewhat uncomfortable in the formal attire. At the sight of her, he removed his hat, his expression one of frank admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Martha felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself." The drive into town was filled with a pleasant anticipation, both of them consciously setting aside concerns about Andrew's possible presence to enjoy the evening ahead. Prescott looked festive as they approached, lanterns illuminating the main street, with greenery and ribbons decorating the storefronts, despite the snow piled along the boardwalks. The town hall was already bustling when they arrived, filled with ranchers, townspeople, and their families. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food and punch lined one wall. Martha felt a momentary hesitation as they entered, conscious of the curious glances and whispered comments their arrival generated. Elijah, sensing her discomfort, placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." They made their way through the crowd, exchanging greetings with neighbors and acquaintances. Some were genuinely welcoming, others barely concealed their judgment behind polite smiles. Martha held her head high, determined not to let small-town gossip spoil the evening. The dancing began in earnest after some brief, welcoming remarks from the mayor. True to his warning, Elijah proved somewhat awkward on the dance floor, but his earnest efforts and the way he looked at her, as if she were the only woman in the room, more than compensated for any missteps. During a break between dances, as they stood sampling misses. Peterson's famous apple cider, Martha became aware of a sudden tension in Elijah's posture. Following his gaze, she saw Andrew Miller had just entered the hall, flanked by two men she recognized as regulars from the saloon. Her heart sank as Andrew spotted them, and a slow, malicious smile spread across his face. "We should go," she whispered, her hand tightening on Elijah's arm. Elijah covered her hand with his own. "No," he said firmly. "We won't let him drive us away. Just stay close to me." For a time, it seemed Andrew might content himself with glaring from across the room. He helped himself liberally to the punch, which Martha suspected had been spiked with whiskey, judging by the increasingly boisterous behavior of some of the men gathered around the bowl. As the evening progressed, Martha began to relax slightly, caught up in the festive atmosphere and Elijah's attentive company. Several of the town matrons made a point of greeting her warmly, perhaps out of Christian charity given the season, or possibly because Elijah Nash was well respected despite his preference for solitude. It was during a particularly lively reel that disaster struck. Martha had stepped away briefly to cool off, leaving Elijah engaged in conversation with Tom Wilkins near the band. As she made her way to the punch bowl, a rough hand closed around her arm, yanking her into a shadowed corner. "Enjoying yourself, Martha." Andrew's breath was hot against her cheek, reeking of alcohol. She tried to pull away. "Let go of me," she hissed, not wanting to cause a scene. His grip tightened painfully. "Still putting on airs, I see, playing the proper lady while sleeping with Nash." "That's none of your business," Martha replied, still trying to keep her voice low even as panic rose in her throat. "We're divorced, Andrew. I'm not your concern anymore," he laughed, an ugly sound. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? You were mine first. I paid for you. Your uncle was glad to be rid of you for $50 and a promise to take you off his hands." Martha went still with shock. "What are you talking about?" Andrew's smile was cruel. "You didn't know. Your precious uncle sold you to me just as surely as I tried to sell you to Nash. The only difference is, I paid a lot less." The revelation hit Martha like a physical blow. Uncle William, her father's brother who had taken her in after her parents' deaths, had always seemed coldly indifferent to her welfare, but she'd never imagined he'd actually sold her like property. "You're lying," she managed, though a terrible certainty was forming in her gut. "Ask him yourself if you don't believe me." Andrew sneered, nodding toward the other side of the room where William Gates stood with his wife, apparently in town for the holidays from their home in Flagstaff. "Though I doubt he'll admit it, respectable businessman that he is." Martha followed his gaze, stunned to see her uncle. She hadn't laid eyes on him since her wedding day, when he'd given her away with what she now recognized had been unseemly haste. Her distraction gave Andrew the opportunity he'd been waiting for. He dragged her further into the shadows, his intentions clear in the ugly twist of his mouth. "Maybe I should remind you what you're missing," he growled, his free hand pawing at her waist. Martha's fear gave way to anger. With strength born of desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting solidly with a target that made Andrew double over with a strangled cry. "I'm not missing anything," she spat, wrenching free of his slackened grip. She hurried back toward the main hall, heart pounding, only to nearly collide with Elijah, who was clearly searching for her, concern etched on his features. "Martha, are you all right? I saw Miller follow you," and he broke off, taking in her disheveled appearance and the anger in her eyes. "What did he do?" The question was dangerously quiet. "Nothing I couldn't handle," she assured him, smoothing her skirts with hands that trembled slightly. "But I'd like to leave now, if you don't mind." Elijah looked past her to where Andrew was still recovering in the shadows, surrounded now by his cronies who were helping him straighten. His expression darkened. "Of course. Let me get our coats." As Elijah moved toward the coat check, Martha became aware of her uncle approaching, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that might have been guilt. Martha. William Gates was a tall, austere man in his 50s, successful in business but, as Martha now recalled with painful clarity, always tight-fisted when it came to supporting his orphaned niece. "I had no idea you were in Prescott. Your aunt and I heard you'd married, but then lost track." "Uncle William," Martha acknowledged coldly. How convenient that you lost track after selling me to Andrew Miller like a piece of livestock. Her uncle blanched. I don't know what you're talking about, he blustered, though his eyes shifted away from hers. Don't you? Martha felt a lifetime of hurt and abandonment crystallize into cold anger. Andrew just told me about your arrangement, $50 and a promise to take me off your hands. Was that all I was worth to you? After my father, your brother, entrusted me to your care, William's face reddened. The boy had prospects, he defended weakly. A farm of his own, he said. How was I to know he'd turn out to be a ne'er-do-well? You might have taken the time to find out before handing your 18-year-old niece over to him, Martha replied, her voice steady despite the emotion churning within her. But that would have required actually caring about my welfare, wouldn't it? Her uncle drew himself up, indignation replacing guilt. Now see here, young lady, no, you see here, Martha interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I survived what you did to me. I survived what Andrew did to me, and I've found happiness despite both of you. So you can take your excuses and your guilt and leave me be. I want nothing more from you, not apologies, not explanations, nothing. William Gates stared at her, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Before he could formulate a response, Elijah appeared at Martha's side, coats in hand and a question in his eyes. Everything all right? He asked, looking between Martha and the older man. Yes, Martha said firmly, taking her coat from him. My uncle was just leaving. Elijah's eyebrows rose slightly at the word uncle, but he said nothing, simply helping Martha with her coat as William Gates retreated, clearly uncomfortable under Elijah's steady gaze. They left the hall with as much dignity as Martha could muster, though she was keenly aware of the whispers that followed them. Outside, the cold air was a shock after the warmth of the crowded hall, but Martha welcomed it, drawing deep breaths to steady her racing heart. Do you want to talk about it? Elijah asked quietly as he helped her into the wagon. Martha shook her head. Not yet, later perhaps. The drive home was silent, each lost in thought. Martha's mind whirled with the revelations of the evening first Andrew's crude assault, then the confirmation of her uncle's betrayal. Yet beneath the hurt and anger, she felt something else, a strange sense of liberation. The pieces of her past were finally coming together, allowing her to understand how she had ended up in such a desperate situation with Andrew. When they reached the ranch, Elijah built up the fire in the main house parlor and prepared hot chocolate, a rare treat he'd purchased for the Christmas season. They sat side by side on the sofa, the warm drinks cradled in their hands, the crackling fire the only sound for several minutes. Finally, Martha broke the silence, telling Elijah everything: her parents' deaths from fever when she was 16, the reluctant guardianship of her uncle and his cold, penny-pinching wife, the rushed introduction to Andrew when she was 18, and the hasty wedding that followed. And now, the final piece of the puzzle: her uncle's mercenary disposal of an unwanted dependent. Elijah listened without interruption, though she could feel his tension in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way his free hand clenched and unclenched on his knee. I always wondered why Uncle William was so eager for the match, Martha concluded. Andrew had seemed charming enough, but there was little courtship, and my uncle pressed for the wedding with unusual enthusiasm. Now I know why. I'm sorry, Martha, Elijah said finally, his voice rough with controlled anger. What they did to you, both of them, it's unforgivable. Martha sipped her chocolate thoughtfully. The strange thing is, I feel lighter knowing the truth. All these years, I've carried this burden of failure, wondering what I did wrong, why my uncle was so eager to be rid of me, why Andrew's affection turned to cruelty so quickly. Now I see it wasn't about me at all. It was about them, their greed, their selfishness. Elijah set aside his mug and took her free hand in both of his. You're the strongest person I know, he said with quiet conviction, to endure all that and still be capable of such kindness, such generosity of spirit. Martha felt tears prick her eyes at his words. I don't feel strong most days. That's what makes you truly strong, he replied, raising her hand to his lips. You keep going, keep caring, keep trying, even when it would be easier to become hard and bitter. Martha set aside her own mug and turned to face him fully. Because of you, she said softly. You showed me there could be goodness again, that not all men are like Andrew or my uncle. Elijah's eyes darkened with emotion. Martha, he began, then hesitated. What is it? She encouraged. He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon after everything you've been through, but tonight seeing Miller put his hands on you, realizing how easily I could lose you. He paused, his gaze intense. I love you, Martha. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Though she had known they were moving in this direction, the directness of his declaration took her breath away. Are you asking what I think you're asking? His smile was both tender and nervous. I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife. Not right away, he added quickly. I know you need time and there's still the matter of Miller to resolve, but someday when you're ready. Martha felt joy bubble up within her, unexpected and sweet. I don't need time to know my own heart, Elijah. I love you too. And yes, I would be honored to become your wife someday. The kiss they shared was deeper than those that had come before, full of promise and a new certainty about their future together. When they finally separated, Martha rested her forehead against his, content in the quiet moment of connection. The peaceful interlude was broken by a sound that made them both stiffen, the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by the frightened whinnying of horses in the barn. Elijah was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Stay here, he ordered, reaching for his own rifle which stood ready by the door. Elijah, Martha began, fear clutching at her heart. Lock the door behind me, he said, his expression grim, and get the shotgun ready. Before she could protest further, he was gone, slipping out into the night with a stealth that reminded her he had once been a soldier. Martha hurried to comply with his instructions, securing the door and retrieving the shotgun from its place by the kitchen door. Her hands were steady as she checked that it was loaded, her fear channeled into purposeful action. Through the window, she could see little in the moonlit yard beyond the barn, where a lantern now glowed, indicating Elijah's presence. The horses had quieted, suggesting whatever had startled them was no longer an immediate threat. Minutes stretched endlessly as Martha waited, the shotgun ready in her hands, straining to hear any sound beyond the normal creaks of the house and the wind outside. When a knock finally came at the door, she approached cautiously. Martha, it's me, Elijah called, his voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled anger. She unlocked the door quickly, relief washing over her at the sight of him unharmed, though his expression was thunderous. What happened? She asked as he stepped inside, securing the door behind him. Someone took a shot at the barn, Elijah reported grimly, deliberately aiming to frighten the horses, not to hit anything vital. He shook snow from his coat, and they left a message. From his pocket, he withdrew a crumpled piece of paper. Martha took it with trembling fingers, smoothing it out to read the crude block letters. Next time IT won't be the horses. What's mine is mine. There was no signature, but none was needed. Andrew Miller's vindictiveness was clear in every word. He followed us from town, Martha realized with a chill. Waited until he thought we might be. Distracted, Elijah nodded, his jaw clenched. Probably hoped to catch us unawares. When he saw the lights still on, he settled for leaving his message instead. Martha sank onto the sofa, the note clutched in her hand. This has to end, Elijah. He won't stop until he's hurt one or both of us. I know. Elijah paced the room, energy and anger radiating from him. I should ride into town tonight, bring the sheriff back with me. In this weather, the snow's getting worse. Martha shook her head. Besides, what can the sheriff do? There's no proof it was Andrew, just our suspicions. Elijah stopped his pacing, his expression resolute. Then I'll handle it myself. No, Martha said sharply, rising to stand before him. That's exactly what he wants, to draw you into a confrontation where one of you might be killed. I won't have your blood on my hands. And I won't have yours on mine, Elijah countered, his control slipping. If he hurt you, Martha, if he took you from me. Martha placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. He won't. We'll find another way. Elijah covered her hands with his own. What other way is there? Miller won't listen to reason, he's proven that. And the law can't or won't protect us effectively out here. Martha was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, slowly, an idea began to form. What if we remove his reason for pursuing us? What do you mean? Andrew doesn't want me back because he loves me, Martha explained, her thoughts crystallizing. He wants me back because his pride was wounded when you essentially bought me from him. He feels cheated, humiliated. Elijah's brow furrowed. Go on. So we give him what he really wants, not me, but vindication, compensation. Martha looked up at Elijah, her plan taking shape. You're good with horses. That stallion of yours, the one Andrew originally wanted to trade for me, how much is it worth? Understanding dawned in Elijah's eyes. Midnight. 500, easy. More to the right, buyer. Offer him the horse, Martha said. Tell him you've reconsidered his original deal, that you realize now the horse for his ex-wife wasn't such a bad trade after all. Elijah looked skeptical. You think he'd accept? I think his greed might overcome his pride, Martha replied, especially if you make it clear this is a one-time offer, take it or leave it. I don't like it, Elijah said after a moment. Midnight's the foundation of my breeding program. And it feels too much like acknowledging his twisted view of you as property. It's just a horse, Elijah, Martha said gently. A valuable one, yes, but still just an animal, and it's not about acknowledging his view, it's about playing to his weaknesses to end this before someone gets hurt. Elijah paced again, considering. Even if I agreed, he might take the horse and still come after you. Then we make it a public transaction, Martha countered. In town with witnesses, including the sheriff. Make sure everyone knows Andrew accepted the horse as final settlement of any claim he thinks he has. The idea clearly didn't sit well with Elijah, but Martha could see him recognizing the practical merits of her plan. It might work, he admitted reluctantly. But I don't like using Midnight as a pawn. Martha stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. I know you don't, but I've seen how you look at that horse with pride and affection, yes, but not the way you look at me. She smiled slightly. If I'm wrong, now would be the time to tell me. That drew a reluctant laugh from him. You know you're not wrong. I'd trade every horse I own for your safety. Just one horse will do, she assured him. And who knows, maybe someday you'll be able to buy him back or breed one just as fine. Elijah pulled her into his arms, holding her close. You continue to amaze me, Martha Gates. Most women would be hysterical after what happened tonight. Martha rested her head against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I've learned that hysteria rarely solves problems, and I'm tired of living in fear. They stayed like that for a long while, the fire burning low in the grate, the wind howling outside with increasing intensity as the snowstorm gathered strength. Finally, Elijah spoke again. It's too late, and the weather's too bad to attempt the journey to town tonight. But first thing tomorrow, if the snow lets up, I'll go find Miller and make the offer. Martha nodded against his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he cautioned. There's no guarantee he'll accept. He will, Martha said with more confidence than she felt. His greed has always been his defining trait. That night, for the first time, Martha stayed in the main house rather than returning to her cabin. The storm had worsened to a full blizzard, making the short walk treacherous, and neither of them wanted to be separated with the threat of Andrew's return, however unlikely in such weather. Elijah insisted she take his bedroom while he kept watch in the parlor. Too exhausted to argue, Martha accepted the arrangement, though she left the bedroom door ajar, drawing comfort from the knowledge that he was near. Despite the day's tensions, or perhaps because of them, Martha fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She dreamed of spring, of the garden in full bloom, of children's laughter ringing across the yard, of Elijah standing on the veranda, watching their children play with a smile of contentment on his face. A dream of the future they might build, if only they could put the past behind them once and for all. Morning brought a landscape transformed by snow, pristine white drifts surrounding the buildings and fences of the ranch. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a crystalline blue sky and a sun that sparkled off the snow with blinding intensity. Elijah was already up when Martha emerged from the bedroom, dressed in the same clothes as the previous day, her hair hastily arranged. He had coffee brewing and biscuits warming in the oven, a simple breakfast prepared with obvious care. You should have woken me, Martha said, embarrassed to find him doing her usual tasks. You needed the rest, he replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. And I'm not entirely helpless in the kitchen. They ate quickly, both aware of the day's mission ahead. After breakfast, Martha insisted on returning to her cabin to change into fresh clothes while Elijah saw to the horses, making sure all had weathered the night's storm without harm. When she returned to the main house, Elijah was saddling Midnight, his expression grim but resolved. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as she approached, bundled against the cold in her warmest coat and a knitted scarf. Martha nodded. "I'm sure, though I wish I could come with you." "Absolutely not," Elijah said firmly. "If Miller rejects the offer, things could get ugly. I won't have you anywhere near him." Though part of her bristled at being left behind, Martha recognized the wisdom in his words. "Promise me you'll be careful, no heroics." "I promise," he said, then added with a faint smile, "though I doubt offering a man my best horse qualifies as heroic." "It does to me," Martha replied softly. "You're giving up something you value for my sake. That's the definition of heroism in my book." Elijah's expression softened. He drew her close for a brief but fervent kiss. "I'll be back before nightfall, with or without Midnight. Either way, this ends today." Martha watched as he mounted the stallion, the magnificent black horse prancing slightly in the snow, eager for exercise after the confinement of the storm. They made a striking pair, man and horse, equally strong, equally proud. "Godspeed," she called as they rode away, Elijah raising a hand in acknowledgement before disappearing down the snow-covered trail toward Prescott. The day stretched endlessly for Martha as she waited. She kept herself busy with household tasks, preparing a hearty stew for dinner, mending clothes that had been set aside for weeks, anything to occupy her hands and mind. Yet her thoughts continually returned to Elijah, imagining the confrontation with Andrew, fearing the worst despite her outward confidence in her plan. As the winter sun began its early descent, Martha found herself increasingly at the window, straining to see any sign of movement on the trail from town. When she finally spotted a lone figure approaching, her heart sank. Only one rider, meaning either Elijah had been successful in his mission or something had gone terribly wrong. She hurried outside, not bothering with her coat in her haste, and waited anxiously as the rider drew nearer. Relief flooded her as she recognized Elijah, mounted not on Midnight but on his second-best horse, a dependable bay gelding. "You did it," she breathed as he dismounted, noting his exhausted but triumphant expression. "It's done," he confirmed, leading the bay toward the barn. "Miller has his horse, and we have his signed agreement, witnessed by the sheriff and half the town, that he relinquishes any claim to you or this property." Martha followed him into the barn, where he began unsaddling the bay. "Tell me everything." Elijah worked as he talked, his movements efficient despite his obvious fatigue. "Found him at the saloon, nursing a hangover and his wounded pride from last night's failed attempt to frighten us. Made the offer straight out Midnight in exchange for his signed agreement to leave us in peace." "And he accepted just like that?" Martha was skeptical. "Not just like that," Elijah admitted with a wry smile. "There was some posturing, some demands for additional compensation. But when I made it clear it was the horse or nothing and that the offer expired at noon, his greed won out." Martha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. "So it's really over?" Elijah turned to her, his task complete. "As over as it can be. The agreement's legally binding. Judge Wilson made sure of that, and Miller's already talking about heading to California with his new prize. Seems he's worn out his welcome in Prescott." "California," Martha repeated, hardly daring to believe their troubles might be truly ending. "That's a long way from here." "Far enough," Elijah agreed, drawing her into his arms, "and if he knows what's good for him, he'll stay there." They walked back to the house together, the winter chill driving them inside to the warmth of the fire Elijah had built before departing that morning. As they shed their outdoor things, Martha noticed a small package on the table that hadn't been there when she last checked. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. Elijah looked uncharacteristically nervous. "A Christmas gift. I was going to wait until Christmas Day, but after everything that's happened, it seemed right to give it to you now." Martha unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small velvet box. Her heart quickened as she opened it to find a simple gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the firelight. "Elijah," she breathed, looking up at him in wonder. He took the box gently from her hands. I know we agreed to wait to give you time. But today, trading midnight, I realized something important. He removed the ring from its box and held it before her. Things, even valuable things like that horse, are just things. They can be replaced, rebuilt, bred again. But you, Martha, you're irreplaceable to me. Martha felt tears gathering in her eyes as he continued. I don't want to wait anymore. Life's too uncertain, too precious to waste a single day. So I'm asking you properly, Martha Gates, will you marry me? Not someday, but soon as you're ready. Yes, Martha said without hesitation, her voice clear despite her tears. Yes, Elijah Nash, I will marry you, and I'm ready now, today, tomorrow, whenever you say. Elijah slipped the ring onto her finger, his own hands not entirely steady. Christmas Day, he suggested. If we can arrange it with the minister. A new beginning at the end of this year of change. Martha looked down at the ring on her finger, then back up at the man who had saved her in so many ways, first from Andrew's cruelty, then from a life of mere survival without joy or hope. Christmas Day is perfect, she agreed. Their kiss was both a seal on their promise and a celebration of the future now spread before them, a future free from Andrew Miller's shadow, bright with possibility and love. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of preparation and quiet joy. News of their engagement spread quickly through the scattered community around Prescott, bringing well-wishers to the ranch despite the snowy conditions. Martha was touched by the genuine congratulations offered by neighbors who had previously kept their distance, uncertain of her position in Elijah's household. Reverend Thomas agreed readily to perform the ceremony on Christmas Day, suggesting they hold it at the small church in Prescott after the regular morning service. Martha worked on a simple but elegant wedding dress, adapting a pattern from a magazine Mrs. Wilkins had lent her, using cream-colored fabric purchased in town during Elijah's one subsequent trip for supplies. For his part, Elijah seemed to walk with a new lightness, the burden of constant vigilance finally lifted from his shoulders. He spent hours in the barn each day, working with his remaining horses, particularly a promising young colt that he told Martha might someday rival Midnight in quality. I'll breed another like him, he assured her one evening as they sat planning their future. Better, even. And in the meantime, the money from the other horses will see us through. Martha reached for his hand across the table. I never doubted it, but even if we had to start over completely, I'd still count myself blessed to be starting with you. Christmas Eve arrived cold but clear, the stars seeming especially brilliant above the snow-covered landscape. Martha spent the day cooking traditional holiday dishes: a small ham, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie that filled the house with its spicy aroma. As darkness fell, they sat before the fire in the parlor, a small fir tree Elijah had cut from their property standing in the corner, decorated with paper chains Martha had made and a few precious glass ornaments Elijah had purchased in town. I have something for you, Martha said, retrieving a carefully wrapped package from beneath the tree. I know we're exchanging gifts tomorrow, but this one seems right for tonight. Elijah unwrapped the package to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue that matched his eyes, and a framed photograph she'd had taken secretly during their last trip to town. How did you manage this? He asked, studying the photograph with evident pleasure. It showed Martha in her green Christmas dress, smiling directly at the camera with a confidence that would have been unimaginable just months before. Mrs. Holloway helped arrange it with the photographer, Martha explained. I thought you might like something to keep with you when you're out working the ranch. Elijah set the gifts carefully aside and drew her into his arms. I love them, and I love you, Martha Gates, soon to be Martha Nash. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and contemplating the momentous change that tomorrow would bring. Finally, Martha voiced the one concern that had been nagging at her. What about children, Elijah? I told you what Andrew always said, that I'm barren, if that's true. Then we'll be a family of 2, Elijah said firmly. Or we'll take in children who need homes as I once did. There are many orphans from the war still seeking families. His expression softened. But Martha, just because you didn't conceive with Miller doesn't mean you can't have children. As I said before, the problem could as easily have been his. Martha nodded, comforted by his assurance but still uncertain. I just don't want you to be disappointed. The only thing that could disappoint me would be losing you, Elijah replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Everything else, we'll face together as it comes. Morning brought a Christmas day bright with winter sunshine and the promise of new beginnings. They exchanged their remaining gifts, practical items mostly, with the occasional indulgence. Martha had made Elijah a new shirt to wear for the wedding, and he presented her with a pair of delicate pearl earrings that had belonged to his mother. She would have loved you, he said, as Martha admired them in the small mirror over the washstand. She had the same strength of character, the same gentle heart. They arrived at the church in Prescott just as the regular Christmas service was concluding. To Martha's surprise, quite a crowd remained for their wedding, not just the neighbors who had visited the ranch in recent days, but townspeople Martha knew only by sight, all seeming genuinely pleased to witness the union. Even more surprising was the presence of her aunt, standing somewhat awkwardly at the back of the church. Uncle William was nowhere to be seen, for which Martha was grateful. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Martha wore her cream-colored dress with the pearl earrings, and a wreath of evergreen in her hair in lieu of flowers that couldn't be found in winter. Elijah, handsome in his new shirt and best suit, watched her walk down the short aisle with an expression of such reverent joy that Martha felt tears threatening. Their vows were traditional, but spoken with conviction that gave the familiar words new meaning. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, and Elijah kissed her with tender reverence before the assembled witnesses, Martha felt a sense of rightness, of homecoming, that transcended the simple country church and the modest celebration. After accepting congratulations from well-wishers, Martha was surprised when her aunt approached, looking nervous but determined. "Martha," Aunt Sarah began awkwardly, "I wanted to wish you happy. Your new husband seems a fine man." "He is," Martha agreed, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected olive branch. "I also wanted to say." Her aunt hesitated, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I didn't know what William had arranged with Miller, about the money. I only learned of it recently, when your uncle let it slip during an argument." She looked genuinely distressed. "I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted you to know I wasn't party to it." Martha studied her aunt's face, seeing truth in her embarrassment and regret. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "It helps to know that." Aunt Sarah nodded, seeming relieved by Martha's reception. "If you ever need anything." She began, then trailed off, clearly aware of how inadequate the offer was after years of neglect. "We'll be fine," Martha assured her, not unkindly. "But thank you." As her aunt moved away, Elijah appeared at Martha's side. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Martha slipped her hand into his. "Yes, just making peace with the past, I think." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of well wishes, shared food, and celebration. When they finally returned to the ranch as the short winter day faded to dusk, Martha felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Elijah must have sensed her fatigue, for he surprised her by sweeping her into his arms as they reached the main house's door. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, the house welcomed them with the lingering sense of Christmas baking and the gentle glow of lamps Elijah had carefully prepared before they left that morning. A fire was laid ready in the grate, needing only a match to spring to life. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nash," Elijah said softly as he set her on her feet. Martha looked around the parlor that had become so familiar over the past months, seeing it with new eyes not as her employer's home where she worked, but as their shared dwelling, the foundation of their future together. "It's good to be home," she replied, the words carrying all the weight of her journey from frightened, abused wife to confident, beloved partner. That night, as they discovered each other in the intimate dance of new lovers, Martha felt the final ghosts of her past recede. In Elijah's tender but passionate embrace, she found healing for wounds both seen and unseen, and the promise of a love that would continue to grow through all the seasons of their life together. Epilogue. Christmas. 1882, the sound of children's laughter filled the expanded main house of the Nash Ranch as Martha put final touches on the Christmas dinner. 7 years had passed since that first Christmas when she and Elijah had exchanged their vows, years filled with hard work, joy, occasional sorrows, and the gradual building of a life richer than either had dared to imagine. Mama, Peter's pulling the ornaments off the tree again. 5-year-old Sarah called from the parlor, her voice carrying the weighty disapproval only a big sister can muster. Martha smiled, wiping her hands on her apron before going to intervene. In the parlor, she found her daughter standing with hands on hips, glaring at 2-year-old Peter who clutched a glass ball in his chubby fist, clearly delighted with his treasure. "Gently now, little man," Martha said, kneeling beside her son. "These are special. Look, but don't touch, remember." Peter's lower lip protruded stubbornly, but he allowed Martha to return the ornament to the much larger tree that now graced their parlor. The room itself had been expanded 2 years ago, when Elijah's successful horse breeding operation had finally produced enough income for the improvements Martha had long desired for their growing family. "Where's your father?" Martha asked Sarah, who had returned to stringing popcorn for the tree with intense concentration. "Out in the barn with Mr. Wilkins," Sarah replied without looking up. "They're looking at the new colt." Martha nodded, unsurprised. Tom Wilkins had become Elijah's most reliable customer and a close friend. The colt in question was the latest offspring of Champion's legacy. The stallion Elijah had painstakingly bred and trained to replace Midnight, a horse that had indeed surpassed his predecessor in both beauty and speed. As if thinking of her husband had conjured him, the door opened to admit Elijah and Tom, both stamping snow from their boots and bringing a gust of winter air with them. "That colt's going to be a beauty, Nash," Tom was saying as they entered. "I'll take him as soon as he's weaned, price sight unseen," Elijah laughed, his face weathered by years of outdoor work but still handsome, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You haven't even asked what I'm charging." "Don't need to," Tom replied good-naturedly. "Your horses are worth every penny." He stayed for coffee and some of Martha's Christmas cookies before departing to spend the holiday with his own family. As Martha showed him out, she caught sight of a rider approaching down the long drive, a woman, judging by the silhouette. "Are you expecting company?" Tom asked, following her gaze. "Not today," Martha replied, puzzled. Most of their neighbors were occupied with their own celebrations. As the rider drew closer, Martha recognized her Aunt Sarah, bundled against the cold but sitting straight in the saddle despite her advancing years. It had been several months since her last visit, though the relationship had warmed considerably over the years, especially after William's death 3 years prior. "Aunt Sarah," Martha called, hurrying out to meet her. "What a surprise, is everything all right?" Her aunt dismounted with Tom's assistance, her expression both nervous and determined. "I hope I'm not intruding on your Christmas," she began. "Of course not," Martha assured her, though she wondered at the unexpected visit. "Come in out of the cold." Inside, introductions were made, and Peter immediately claimed his great-aunt's attention, showing her the wooden horse Elijah had carved for his Christmas gift. Sarah, shyer around the relative she saw only occasionally, remained close to Martha's side. It wasn't until the children were occupied with their gifts and Elijah had taken Tom's leave that Aunt Sarah revealed the purpose of her visit. "I've been going through William's papers," she explained, removing an envelope from her bag. "Clearing things out before I sell the house in Flagstaff. I found this in a locked drawer of his desk." She handed the envelope to Martha with evident discomfort. "I think you should have it." Martha opened the envelope curiously. Inside was a bank draft for $500 and a brief note in her uncle's cramped handwriting for Martha. "A debt long overdue. May it help right an old wrong." "I don't understand," Martha said, looking up at her aunt in confusion. Aunt Sarah sighed. "It appears William set this aside some years ago after your wedding to Elijah. He never sent it, never mentioned it to me. Perhaps his pride wouldn't allow it." She hesitated. "I believe it was his way of trying to make amends for what he did selling you to Miller all those years ago. Martha stared at the bank draft, emotions warring within her. $500 was a considerable sum, more than 10 times what her uncle had received from Andrew, according to the latter's claim. It wouldn't erase the past, but it represented a recognition, however belated, of the wrong done to her. "You don't have to accept it," Aunt Sarah added quickly. "I would understand if you tore it up, but I felt you should have the choice." Martha looked across the room to where Elijah was helping Peter arrange his wooden animals, his patience and love evident in every gentle movement. She thought of their journey together, the sacrifices he had made for her, the life they had built from the ashes of her first marriage, the family that now brought them such joy. "I'll accept it," she decided. "Not for myself, but for the children. We'll put it aside for their education." Aunt Sarah nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I think William would be pleased by that use." Later, after her aunt had departed with promises to return for a longer visit in the spring, and the children had been put to bed with visions of Christmas sweets dancing in their heads, Martha and Elijah sat before the fire, as they had on so many evenings over the years. $500, Elijah mused, holding the bank draft to the firelight. A tidy sum. "The same amount Midnight was worth," Martha observed, the irony not lost on either of them. "The horse you traded to free us from Andrew." Elijah smiled, tucking the bank draft back into its envelope. "Best trade I ever made, though I didn't know it at the time." Martha leaned against his shoulder, contentment warming her from within. "Do you ever wonder what happened to him, to Andrew?" "Sometimes," Elijah admitted. "Last I heard, he'd lost Midnight in a card game somewhere near Sacramento." "Poetic justice, in a way." Martha nodded, thinking of the long journey from that dusty day outside Prescott when Andrew had first proposed the infamous trade, to this quiet Christmas night surrounded by the fruits of love and labor. "I used to wonder why things happened the way they did," she said softly. "Why I had to endure Andrew, why my uncle betrayed me, all of it. Now I think perhaps it was all leading here to you, to our children, to this life we've built." Elijah turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'd spare you the pain of those years if I could, but I'm selfishly grateful for whatever path brought you to me." Martha reached up to trace the beloved contours of his face, still handsome though now bearing the lines of approaching middle age. "As am I. Every step, every tear, every moment of fear, all worth it to end here with you." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows to join the blanket already covering the ranch. Inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, casting a golden glow over the room where Martha and Elijah sat entwined, their love a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of true partnership. From the children's room came a soft call. "Mama, Papa, is it Christmas morning yet?" They exchanged smiles, the private communication of parents who share both the joys and challenges of raising young ones. "Not yet, sweetheart," Martha called back. "Go back to sleep." As the house settled once more into silence, broken only by the occasional pop from the fireplace and the distant howl of a coyote, Martha reflected on the unexpected gift her uncle had left, not just the money, but the acknowledgement, however late, of his wrongdoing. It was a closing of a circle, the final healing of an old wound. "Merry Christmas, my love," Elijah murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Merry Christmas," Martha replied, nestling closer in his embrace. "And many, many more to come." In that moment, secure in the knowledge of a love hard-won but unshakable, Martha knew with absolute certainty that they would indeed share many more Christmases, many more years of building and growing together. The girl who had once been traded for a horse had found, at last, her true value not in what others would pay for her, but in her own strength, her own heart, and the family she and Elijah had created together. The Nash Ranch, once simply a place of work and shelter, had become in the truest sense a home, a testament to what can be built when love, respect, and perseverance combine to overcome even the darkest beginnings. And as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world outside in pristine white, Martha and Elijah held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them here and the future that stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility.